He was Dr. Julian Croft, the golden boy of anesthesiology, working on a billionaire in the most advanced operating room money could buy. But when the patient's blood pressure crashed and the state-of-the-art monitors began to screen with contradictory data, his genius evaporated into pure panic. The lead surgeon, a living legend, shot him a look that could freeze fire. "Doctor, are you in control?" Cornered and humiliated, Dr. Croft deflected his fury onto the quietest person in the room, the unassuming, 50-year-old nurse, Ana. "Don't just stand there gawking. Do something useful for once," he spat. The surgical team smirked, waiting for the old nurse to shrink away. But she didn't. Amid the chaos of alarms and failing technology, Ana was the only calm in the storm. Because she didn't need the machines. In her mind, she could see it all, the precise calculations, the perfect dosage. She looked directly at the panicked doctor, her voice soft but unbreakable, ready to say the three simple words that would save a life and expose his arrogance to the world. The Orion Wing of St. Damian's Premier was less like a hospital and more like a temple dedicated to the gods of medicine. Gleaming chrome and sterile white surfaces reflected the cool, efficient glow of a dozen monitors. Every piece of equipment was the latest, the most expensive, and the most complex. Today, the patient on the table was Marcus Thorne, a tech billionaire whose heart was undergoing a complex valve replacement, a procedure as delicate and high-stakes as the man himself. At the head of the table stood Dr. Evelyn Reed. Her every movement was an exercise in brutal efficiency. When she held out her hand, a scalpel appeared in it. When she said suction, a tube was there before the word finished echoing in the silent room. She didn't perform surgery, she waged war on mortality, and she had never lost. Her focus was absolute, her tolerance for distraction, non-existent. Across the sterile drape, Dr. Julian Croft, the anesthesiologist, leaned back in his chair with an air of practiced nonchalance. To him, this was just another Tuesday. He handled cases far more complex. He glanced at the main monitor, where a symphony of green, blue, and white lines pulsed in perfect rhythm. Everything was nominal. He permitted himself a small, self-satisfied smile and made a quiet joke to a young resident standing nearby, who laughed a little too eagerly. Moving silently in the periphery was Ana Lúcia. To Dr. Croft, she was a relic, a holdover from a bygone era of nursing. He watched her for a moment, her hands deftly checking in 4-line, her eyes scanning a secondary monitor displaying raw data feeds. "Nurse," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "The primary screen has all the information you need. It's quite simple, really. Just watch the pretty colors." Ana didn't respond. She simply gave a slight nod, her eyes not leaving the screen. She had seen something, a flicker, a shadow in the numbers that the main monitor's algorithm had smoothed over. A tiny, almost imperceptible dip in the patient's potassium saturation that lasted for less than a second. It was nothing. A ghost in the machine. But to Ana, numbers didn't lie. "Dr. Reed, I'm beginning the bypass," Croft announced, his voice regaining its professional tenor. The room tensed as the critical phase of the operation began. Dr. Reed's hands moved with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. Then, a low, single beep echoed in the room. A minor alert. On Croft's main screen, a small yellow flag appeared. Transient arrhythmia, monitor fluctuation suspected. He silenced it with an impatient tap on the screen. "Just a sensor artifact," he announced to the room, more to reassure himself than anyone else. Ana stepped forward slightly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Doctor, his T-wave is flattening. It could be an early sign of hyperkalemia from the cardioplegia solution." Dr. Croft turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing into slits. He stared at her as if she were a bug he'd found floating in his coffee. "Nurse," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I have a degree from Johns Hopkins and 2 fellowships in cardiac anesthesiology. I am perfectly capable of interpreting an EKG. You, on the other hand, are here to check 4 bags and fetch blankets. Do not presume to diagnose my patient for me. Are we clear?" The humiliation was instant and absolute. The resident shuffled his feet, avoiding her gaze. Even Dr. Reed, without looking up from the patient's open chest, radiated a cold wave of annoyance. Ana had broken the unspoken rule. She had questioned a god in his own temple. She simply nodded and stepped back, her face an unreadable mask, but her mind was racing, the numbers now screaming a warning she was forbidden to voice. Less than 2 minutes later, chaos erupted. The single beat became a deafening, panicked siren. The perfect, rhythmic lines on the main monitor dissolved into a jagged, terrifying scribble. The patient's blood pressure was in freefall. Cardiac arrest imminent, the screen flashed in bold, crimson letters. Dr. Croft's arrogance shattered like glass. He leaped from his chair, his hands flying across the touch screens, but the monitors that had been his source of confidence were now his tormentors. They flooded him with a tidal wave of conflicting data. One screen showed critical hypertension while another blared a hypotension warning. His billion-dollar system was having a nervous breakdown. "Give me 50 of epinephrine," he yelled, his voice cracking. "No, wait," another resident called out. "His central venous pressure is already sky-high. It'll kill him." Croft's face went pale. He was frozen, trapped in a hurricane of his own creation. The alarm shrieked, a soundtrack to his failure. That's when Dr. Reed's voice, colder and sharper than any scalpel, sliced through the noise. She still hadn't looked up from her work, but her words struck him like a physical blow. "Dr. Croft, are you losing my patient?" Every eye in the room swiveled to him. His authority, his reputation, everything he had built, was collapsing in real time. He looked around wildly, his mind searching for a lifeline, for someone to blame. And then he saw her. Ana. Standing perfectly still amidst the pandemonium. She wasn't looking at the flashing, failing main screens. Her gaze was fixed on the small, secondary monitor, the one displaying pure, uninterpreted data streams. To the panicked doctor, her stillness wasn't calm, it was incompetence. It was a dereliction of duty. He pointed a shaking finger at her, his voice a venomous snarl. "You! Don't just stand there gawking. I knew I should have requested a younger nurse, someone who understands this technology. What are you even looking at? The screensaver? You're useless." His accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. But Ana did not react as he expected. There were no tears, no defensive retort, no crumbling of her composure. She simply looked up from the screen of raw data, her gaze bypassing him completely, and met the eyes of Dr. Evelyn Reed. It was a silent, professional exchange that lasted only a second, but it was an act of profound defiance. In that moment, she wasn't acknowledging the panicked anesthesiologist, she was communicating with the surgeon in charge. This calm, this utter refusal to be his victim, infuriated Dr. Croft more than any outburst could have. She was a mirror reflecting his own incompetence, and he was desperate to shatter it. He strode over to her station, his expensive shoes squeaking on the polished floor. He jabbed a finger at her small, secondary monitor, which was scrolling with endless lines of alphanumeric code and telemetry data. "This? You're staring at this garbage?" he scoffed, his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. "This is raw data, nurse. It's meaningless noise without the diagnostic software to interpret it. It takes a computer to make sense of this, not a person like you." He turned back to the rest of the surgical team, a cruel, theatrical smile spreading across his face. He was putting on a show now, a desperate, ugly performance to regain his lost authority. "All right, everyone. Let's hear from the expert," he announced with biting sarcasm. "Nurse Lucia, since you seem to have all the answers, and since our million-dollar system is apparently taking a coffee break, why don't you enlighten us?" He leaned against the console, crossing his arms, the picture of mock curiosity. The alarms continued to blare, a frantic heartbeat counting down the seconds of the patient's life. "Tell us, nurse," he continued, his voice dripping with venom. "What is the precise counteractive dosage of buffered potassium chloride and sodium bicarbonate we need to administer? And while you're at it, be sure to factor in the patient's current metabolic acidosis, his body weight of precisely 87.2 kilograms, an estimated 62% renal clearance due to his age, and the interactive half-life of the residual propofol still in his system. The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the shrieking monitors. The other nurses and residents stared, their faces a mixture of horror and pity. What he was asking for was impossible. It was a complex, multivariable pharmacological calculation that would take a senior pharmacist several minutes to run on a dedicated computer, checking and rechecking for safety. To demand it be done mentally, in seconds, under the threat of imminent cardiac arrest, wasn't a question. It was a death sentence for her career. It was a public execution. Dr. Reed's head snapped up. "Croft, stop playing these ridiculous games and fix this now." Her command only made him more desperate. He ignored her, his entire focus now a laser beam of cruelty aimed at Ana. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more chilling than his shouting. "What's the matter, Ana? Are the numbers too big for you? Cat got your tongue?" He straightened up, turning his back on her in a gesture of ultimate dismissal. "See," he boomed to the room. "Useless. A complete waste of space. Someone get a pharmacist on the line, now. And get me the crash cart. We're losing him." The team, jolted back into action, scrambled to obey. They moved around Ana as if she were a ghost, an obstacle to be ignored. In the space of 30 seconds, she had been rendered completely irrelevant. Her experience, her presence, her very existence had been erased by the doctor's panicked rage. The humiliation was total. The impossible challenge had been thrown down and, in everyone's eyes, she had already failed. "Hey, before we go any further, can you do me a quick favor? We're at the moment of truth, where a good person is being crushed by arrogance and ego. If you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or silenced, then you know exactly how Ana feels right now. Her story is about that quiet, unbreakable strength that lives inside all of us. If you believe in that strength, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to me and helps keep sharing stories like Ana's, stories about standing tall when the world tries to knock you down. Thanks for being here with me." The crash cart rattled as it was pushed into position. A junior resident, his hands trembling slightly, began drawing up a dose of epinephrine, just as Dr. Croft had commanded. The other staff moved with frantic, panicked energy, their actions disconnected, their hope fading. They had all abandoned Ana, leaving her in an island of silence amidst the storm. In that silence, Ana closed her eyes for a single, long heartbeat. The cacophony of the alarms, the shouting, the frantic footsteps, it all melted away. For her, the world narrowed to a place of pure, silent logic. The patient on the table was no longer a man, he was a living, breathing equation. A beautiful, complex system of numbers that had been thrown into violent disarray. The flashing monitors were not a source of chaos, but a language, and she was fluent. She could see the story they were telling behind the noise, the cascading failure, the cellular imbalance, the precise, mathematical point of no return that was approaching with terrifying speed. She opened her eyes. Her voice, when it came, was not loud. It was not angry. It was a blade of pure, calm authority that cut through every other sound in the room. "Stop." The word was so unexpected, so utterly out of place, that for a split second, everyone froze. The resident's hand paused, the syringe hovering over the foreport. Dr. Croft, who had been barking orders, stopped mid-sentence. Even Dr. Reed's lightning-fast hands went still over the patient's chest. Ana's gaze was fixed on the young resident. "Do not push that epinephrine," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "His ventricles are already unstable. You will trigger an irreversible fibrillation." Then, she turned her attention to the only person who mattered. She spoke directly to Dr. Reed, her voice steady, respectful, but imbued with an unshakable certainty. "Dr. Reed, the patient is in acute hyperkalemic shock, complicated by severe metabolic acidosis. It's a paradoxical reaction to the cardioplegic solution. Based on his outflow and saturation drop, his serum potassium is approximately 7.9 millimoles per liter. Dr. Croft let out a choked, incredulous laugh. That's insane. You can't possibly know that without a blood gas analysis. It takes 10 minutes to get those results from the lab. Ana did not even grant him a glance. She kept her eyes locked on Dr. Reed, continuing as if he hadn't spoken. We don't have 10 minutes. We have about 90 seconds. The correct protocol is to force the potassium back into the cells. You need to administer 18.5 milliliters of 8.4% sodium bicarbonate, pushed over 60 seconds to buffer the acid. Follow that immediately with an 4 push of 10 units of regular insulin, co-infused with 50 milliliters of 50% dextrose. She paused for a beat. The dextrose infusion must run at exactly 1.25 milliliters per second to prevent hypoglycemic shock. Any faster, and you'll trade one crisis for another. The room was utterly, profoundly silent. The only sound was the steady, screaming pulse of the alarms. Every person in that room, the residents, the other nurses, the surgical techs, was staring at Ana, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and awe. She had not just suggested a medication. She had laid out a complex, multi-step treatment protocol with dosages calculated to a decimal point, complete with infusion rates and a clear-headed rationale. It was a feat of cognitive brilliance that none of them could even begin to comprehend. Dr. Croft's face had gone from pale to a deep, mottled red of pure fury and humiliation. This is madness, Evelyn. Are you listening to this? She's a nurse. She's quoting dosages from memory. It's reckless, it's malpractice. But Dr. Reed wasn't looking at him. Her sharp, intelligent eyes bored into Ana's. She was a master of reading people, of spotting doubt, fear, and deception in the highest pressure situations imaginable. And in Ana's calm, steady gaze, she saw none of it. All she saw was a terrifying, absolute certainty. She looked at the chaos of the monitors, at the crumbling confidence of her star anesthesiologist, and then back at the quiet nurse who had just presented a solution with the clarity of a supercomputer. In that moment, Dr. Evelyn Reed made a decision that would defy every rule in the book. She lifted her chin and pointed the bloody tip of a hemostat at the junior resident. Her voice was pure ice. You heard her. You have your orders. Do exactly as she said. Now. The command was a thunderclap in the silent room. Dr. Croft lunged forward. Evelyn, no. You cannot be serious. I forbid it. This is my patient. Dr. Reed finally turned to look at him. Her expression was one of complete and utter contempt. Right now, Julian, you are a liability. She sounds more competent than you have for the past 5 minutes. So be quiet, and let her work. Or I will have you removed from my operating room. Dr. Reed's final word hung in the air like a death sentence for Julian Croft's ego. He staggered back as if physically struck, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and rage. He was a ghost at his own funeral, forced to watch as the team he was supposed to lead turned their backs on him and their attention to the quiet nurse he had just tried to destroy. The junior resident, his previous fear now replaced by a desperate hope, moved with newfound purpose. His hands, which had been trembling, were now steady as he followed Ana's instructions to the letter. 18.5 milliliters of bicarb, he confirmed, his voice clear. Pushing over 60 seconds. Starting now. Another nurse was already at the medication cart, her movements swift and precise as she prepared the insulin and dextrose. There was no more panic, no more chaos. A new, calm efficiency had settled over the room, and Ana was its center of gravity. She stood by the resident, her eyes not on the chaotic main screen, but on the patient's face and the slow, steady depression of the syringe's plunger. Dr. Croft could only watch, impotent. You're all insane, he whispered to no one, his voice hoarse. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. She's going to kill him. But the patient wasn't dying. As the last of the sodium bicarbonate entered his bloodstream, the first miracle occurred. On the EKG, the jagged, terrifying scrawl of ventricular fibrillation began to soften. The chaotic peaks and valleys smoothed out, first into a ragged, struggling rhythm, and then into something resembling a coherent heartbeat. The piercing, continuous wail of the cardiac arrest alarm faltered, replaced by the less frantic, intermittent beep of a severe arrhythmia warning. It was no longer the sound of death, it was the sound of a fight. A collective, silent gasp went through the room. "His oxygen saturation is up by 2%, a nurse called out from across the room, her voice filled with disbelief. The patient's blood pressure, which had been a flat line on its way to 0, ticked upward. 50/30. Then 55/35. It was still catastrophically low, but it had stopped falling. The freefall was over. Ana's calm voice filled the sudden lull. "Begin the insulin and dextrose infusion. Now." She turned to the nurse managing the 4-pump. "Rate is 1.25 milliliters per second. Not 1.2. Not 1.3. Be exact." The nurse nodded, her fingers flying across the keypad, her eyes wide with a newfound, profound respect. She would have trusted Ana with her own life in that moment. As the second cocktail of medication began to flow into the patient's veins, the true turnaround began. The steady beep of the arrhythmia alarm grew slower, more regular. The struggling heartbeat on the monitor strengthened, the waves growing taller, more defined. The patient's blood pressure began a slow, steady climb, moving out of the red zone and into the yellow. 70/40. 80/50. Then, one by one, the alarms began to silence themselves. The hypotension warning blinked off. The arrhythmia alert was replaced by a sinus tachycardia notification, and then that too disappeared. Within 90 seconds of Ana's initial command, the deafening chaos that had consumed the operating room had evaporated. It was replaced by a profound, reverent silence, broken only by the gentle hum of the ventilator and the strong, steady, rhythmic beep of a stable heartbeat. The patient was back. The junior resident slowly lowered his hands, staring at the monitor and then back at Ana, his mouth hanging slightly open. He looked at her as if she were not a nurse, but some kind of sorceress who had just stared into the abyss and commanded it to back down. The other nurses were exchanging glances of pure, unadulterated shock. They had worked alongside this quiet, unassuming woman for years, never knowing the giant that lived behind her gentle eyes. Dr. Reed, who had never once stopped her delicate work on the patient's heart, allowed herself a single, sharp exhale of breath. She didn't look up, but she spoke, her voice devoid of its earlier ice, replaced by something else, something that sounded almost like respect. "Vitals? Blood pressure 110/70 and rising, doctor," the resident replied, his voice trembling with awe. "Heart rate is 85 and stable. O2 saturation is 98%. Dr. Reed gave a single, sharp nod. It was the highest praise she could offer. It was an admission. "You were right." Ana, for her part, simply nodded back, as if she had done nothing more extraordinary than adjust a pillow. She picked up a chart and began making notes, her handwriting as calm and steady as her voice. The crisis was over. She had stared down a medical hurricane and guided them all safely to shore. And Dr. Julian Croft, the golden boy, the genius, could only stand there, a statue of cold fury, listening to the steady, healthy beep of the machine that was broadcasting his utter and complete humiliation to the entire room. The remainder of the surgery proceeded in a state of surreal calm. Dr. Reed, with the patient now perfectly stable, finished the complex valve replacement with her customary, flawless precision. But the power dynamic in the room had been irrevocably altered. Dr. Julian Croft stood in the corner, silent and defeated, a pariah in his own domain. He was technically still the anesthesiologist on record, but everyone knew he was nothing more than a spectator. The true command center for the patient's vitals was now located at the small station where Nurse Ana Lúcia stood. Half an hour later, a minor alarm chimed, an expected fluctuation in blood pressure as Dr. Reed began to remove the aortic clamps. Instinctively, every head in the room swiveled, not towards Dr. Croft, but towards Ana. Dr. Reed didn't even break stride. "Nurse Lúcia. Your assessment?" The question was a quiet earthquake, shattering the last remnants of the OR's hierarchy. She had not asked for an opinion. She had asked for a professional assessment, a consultation. Ana's eyes scanned her monitor for a moment. "It's a minor pressure variance from the clamp release, doctor," she reported calmly. "It's well within expected parameters. Vitals will restabilize in the next 2 minutes. All other markers are holding steady." Dr. Reed nodded. "Carry on." And just like that, it was official. Ana was in charge. For the rest of the procedure, she guided the junior resident through the minor adjustments needed to bring the patient slowly and safely back from the depths of anesthesia, her instructions always quiet, precise, and perfect. Just as Dr. Reed was placing the final sutures, a nurse from the pathology lab entered the room, holding a piece of paper. It was the printed result of the emergency blood gas test that had been run during the crisis. The nurse looked around the room, his eyes scanning past the disgraced Dr. Croft, and walked directly to Ana, handing her the report. Ana took it, her eyes scanning the columns of numbers. She gave a small, confirmatory nod and then passed the paper to Dr. Reed. "The lab results are in, doctor," she said. Dr. Reed took the paper with a gloved hand. She glanced at it, her eyes focusing on one line in particular. For a moment, she didn't speak. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then, she looked up, her gaze sweeping over the assembled team, before finally landing on Dr. Croft with the force of a physical impact. She read the result aloud, her voice cold and clear. Patient's peak serum potassium level at 14:32 was 7.92 millimoles per liter. A wave of audible gasps swept through the room. A few nurses covered their mouths. The junior resident stared at Ana, his face pale with shock. It was the number. The exact number she had plucked from thin air in the middle of a hurricane. It wasn't an estimate. It wasn't a guess. It was a fact. She had seen the invisible truth with nothing but her mind. The feat was so far beyond their understanding that it felt like witnessing a miracle. For Dr. Croft, that number was a guillotine. He heard it, and the last of the blood drained from his face. He saw the looks of awe being directed at Ana, and the looks of pity and contempt being directed at him. He knew, in that single, soul-crushing moment, that his career at St. Damian's was over. His reputation as a golden boy, a genius, all of it had just been incinerated by the quiet brilliance of the woman he had tried to humiliate. He stumbled backward, gripping the edge of a steel counter to keep himself from falling. Dr. Reed crumpled the paper in her hand. She still hadn't looked away from him. "Julian," she said, her voice now dangerously soft. "Your services in this operating room are concluded. You are dismissed. Security will escort you out. A full incident report will be filed with the Chief of Surgery and the Medical Board this afternoon." It was an execution, delivered with surgical precision. As the team began the process of closing and cleaning, Ana continued her work as if nothing had happened. She finished her meticulous charting, helped the team prepare the patient for his transfer to the ICU, and began quietly restocking her station for the next procedure. There was no victory lap, no moment of gloating. Her humility was, in its own way, as astounding as her talent. The patient was finally wheeled out, stable and on the road to recovery. Dr. Reed, having finished scrubbing out, walked over to Ana's station. The rest of the staff gave them a wide berth. "Ana," Dr. Reed said quietly. It was the first time she had ever used her first name. "I have been a surgeon for 30 years. I have seen things in the OR that would stop a man's heart. But I have never, ever seen anything like what you did in here today." She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Thank you." Ana finally looked up from her chart, her eyes meeting the surgeon's. There was no ego in her expression, only a quiet, profound sense of duty. "We saved him, doctor," she replied softly. "That's all that matters." Long after the patient had been transferred to the ICU and Dr. Reed had departed, a strange, reverent quiet settled over the Orion Wing's operating room. The surgical team went about their cleanup duties, but the usual post-op banter was gone. They moved with a hushed respect, their conversations quiet and focused on one subject. "I was watching the monitor," the junior resident said to a scrub nurse, his voice filled with an almost spiritual awe. The waveform on the EKG changed the second the bicarb hit his system. The second. She knew. It wasn't a guess. She knew exactly how his cells would respond. "And the lab results," the nurse whispered back, shaking her head in disbelief. 7.92, she called it out to 2 decimal places. "How is that even possible?" The story of what happened in O3 began to seep out into the hospital corridors, passed along in hushed tones by the nurses, techs, and residents who had been there. It became an instant legend, the day the hospital's most arrogant doctor crashed and burned, and the quiet, unassuming nurse Lucia saved a billionaire's life with nothing but her mind. Ana, however, was oblivious to the myth being built around her. For her, the heroic moment was over. She finished her shift, meticulously documenting every event in the patient's chart. Then she went to the locker room, changed out of her scrubs into a simple blouse and comfortable slacks, and clocked out. As she walked toward the hospital exit, she felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere around her. People looked at her differently. A group of surgical residents who would have barely acknowledged her before now fell silent as she passed, nodding respectfully. One of them, the young man from the OR, stepped forward. "Nurse Lucia," he said, his voice earnest. "Thank you for what you did today. You taught us all a lesson." Ana offered him a small, tired smile. "Just do right by your patients," she said softly. "That's the only lesson that matters." She continued on her way, leaving him standing there, speechless. Her victory was not in the newfound respect or the whispered awe. Her victory was in the quiet knowledge of a job well done, a life saved. For Dr. Julian Croft, the consequences were far more immediate and brutal. As Dr. Reed had promised, 2 stone-faced security guards were waiting for him outside the OR. They didn't speak, they simply flanked him and began walking. It was the walk of shame, a humiliating parade past the operating rooms, past the colleagues who now stared with a mixture of shock and pity. His name, once a source of pride, now felt like a brand of failure. He was escorted not to his office, but directly to the top floor, to the office of the chief of surgery, Dr. Marcus Thorne, a man who valued the hospital's reputation above all else. Dr. Reed was already there, sitting in a leather chair, her expression as unyielding as granite. The meeting was a slaughter. "Julian," Dr. Thorne began, his voice dangerously calm. "I've just read Dr. Reed's preliminary incident report. Explain to me how a routine valve replacement on one of our most high-profile patients devolved into a near-fatal event under your watch." Croft tried to defend himself, his voice a torrent of panicked excuses. He blamed the equipment, the patient's unexpected reaction, the pressure of the moment. He tried to paint Ana as a rogue element, a reckless nurse who violated protocol. "She got lucky," he insisted, his voice rising with desperation. "It was a wild guess that happened to pay off. She put the patient and this entire hospital at risk." Dr. Reed didn't even flinch. When he was finished, she spoke, her voice cutting through his bluster. "She didn't guess, Julian. She diagnosed. While you were panicking and blaming the technology, she was reading the data. While you were shouting for the wrong drugs, she was calculating the right ones. She slid the lab report across the polished desk. The evidence is right there. She was right about everything. And you were wrong." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Your ego almost cost a man his life. Her competence saved it." Dr. Thorne looked from the report to Croft's crumbling face. The patient was a titan of industry. The hospital could not afford a whiff of scandal, and Croft was now a walking, talking liability. The decision was simple. "Dr. Croft, as of this moment, your clinical privileges at St. Damian's are suspended indefinitely, pending a full review by the medical board." It was a death sentence. A full review was just a formality before termination, and they all knew it. The word would be out before he even reached the parking lot. No other prestigious hospital would touch him. His career as a golden boy was over. An hour later, Julian Croft was cleaning out his locker, shoving his designer shoes and expensive coat into a cardboard box. The news had already spread. No one came to say goodbye. He was a pariah. As he walked out into the evening chill, a broken man, he saw her. Ana. Standing at the public bus stop across the street, a simple grocery bag in her hand, waiting patiently. For a moment, their eyes met across the divide. He expected to see triumph, or scorn, or pity. But he saw none of it. There was just a quiet weariness in her gaze, a profound sadness. And that was the final, crushing blow. She hadn't set out to destroy him. She had just done her job. His ruin wasn't her victory, it was a mess of his own making. The fallout from the incident in the Orion Wing extended beyond Dr. Croft. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the Iron Queen of the Ore, found herself in a period of profound and uncomfortable self-reflection. She had been right to trust Ana in the end, but she had been wrong about everything that came before. Her relentless pursuit of perfection had created a toxic culture of fear, an environment where a brilliant nurse felt she couldn't speak up until the patient was on the brink of death. She had cultivated a world where a doctor's arrogance was valued more than a nurse's quiet wisdom. She had almost lost a patient not to a medical error, but to her own prejudice. The change in her was not dramatic, but it was significant. A week later, during another complex surgery, the young resident on her team hesitated while making a suture. The old Dr. Reed would have eviscerated him with a sharp comment. The new Dr. Reed put down her own tool for a moment. "What are you seeing, doctor?" she asked, her voice neutral. "Talk me through it." The team exchanged shocked glances. Dr. Reed was teaching. She was collaborating. Later that day, she found Ana during her break in the hospital cafeteria. She sat opposite her, a rare act of humility. "I've been thinking about what happened," Dr. Reed said, her voice low. "I select my teams based on resumes, reputations, and the names of their medical schools. I believe that was the formula for excellence." She looked at Ana, her eyes filled with a respect that was entirely new. "You taught me that true genius doesn't always advertise. I was so focused on the pedigree that I almost missed the talent right in front of me. The mistake wasn't just Julian's. It was mine, too." Ana simply took a sip of her tea. "We learn," she said, her voice kind. "That's all we can do." For Ana, life returned to its normal, quiet rhythm. Her small apartment, filled with books on theoretical mathematics and classical music, was her sanctuary. The drama of the hospital faded the moment she walked through her front door. Her incredible mind, which could calculate pharmacology in seconds, was now focused on the simple, elegant logic of a Bach fugue playing softly on the radio. Her value was not defined by the chaos she had conquered, it was rooted in the quiet peace she cultivated for herself. 2 weeks after the incident, a thick, formal envelope arrived from the hospital's board of directors. Inside was a letter of official commendation for her extraordinary and life-saving intervention. It was accompanied by an offer of a newly created position, Senior Clinical Diagnostic Specialist, a role with a significant pay raise, a corner office, and the authority to oversee all critical care nursing staff. It was everything she had earned. It was a crown offered to the woman who had proven herself the quiet queen of the hospital. Ana read the letter twice, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. Then, she took out a piece of simple stationery and wrote a polite, respectful reply. She thanked him for the incredible honor, but humbly declined the position. Her place, she wrote, was not in an office or in meetings. Her place was with the patients. She could do the most good where she had always been, in the operating room, watching the numbers. Months later, Ana stood in or4. A new, younger surgeon was at the helm, and a new anesthesiologist, a woman who had, of course, heard the legend of Ana Lúcia. During a delicate moment in the procedure, a monitor beeped with an unfamiliar warning. The new anesthesiologist, instead of panicking or guessing, immediately turned her head. "Ana," she asked, her voice calm and trusting. "What are you seeing?" Ana's eyes were already on the data streams. "It's a pressure inversion from the patient's position," she said calmly. Adjust the table by 2 degrees. It will resolve. The adjustment was made. The alarm went silent. The surgery continued. The surgeon nodded from across the table. Thank you, Ana. She didn't need the title. She didn't need the office. She had something far more valuable. In the quiet, high-stakes world of the operating room, her name had become its own authority. Her quiet, steady presence was now the hospital's greatest asset. She hadn't changed the system by seeking power, but by proving that true competence needs no introduction. It just is. Ana's story is a powerful reminder that your true worth is not defined by a fancy title, a loud voice, or the approval of those who look down on you. It's measured in your integrity, your quiet competence, and the courage to be the calm in the middle of the storm. The world is full of people who will underestimate you. Let them. The truth, like Ana's perfect calculation, always comes out in the end. Where are you watching from tonight? More importantly, have you ever had a moment where you saw quiet competence silence a room full of noise? Share your story in the comments below. Let's celebrate the unsung heroes together. Thank you for walking this path with me. Hit that follow button to continue our journey through stories of justice, resilience, and the incredible power of the human spirit.